Well, thank you, Ron, and thanks for pulling this meeting together. My name is Minh Le. I serve as the General Manager for Energy and Environmental Services for the County of Los Angeles, and part of my team's role is to drive, transportation electrification infrastructure as well as renewable energy across the county. So I'll be covering a couple different topics today. Just want to remind everyone in Los Angeles, our goals for our region are very aggressive and very much in alignment with state objectives. The county sustainability plan was adopted in 2019 with a number of different goals, but I want to highlight the most important of which I think is the vision for a fossil fuel free LA County. And when most people think of LA County or the LA region, Southern California, you think of the car culture. And you think of sprawling regions, traffic jams, etc. And to some degree also smog. And that's why our board of supervisors adopted this very ambitious goal to have a vision for a fossil fuel-free Los Angeles region. And in order to achieve that, you really need zero-emission infrastructure to refuel vehicles. Whereas the gasoline diesel network has been built out over 100+ years. It's really only been in the last 5 years or so where the infrastructure required for EVs and other zero emission fuels have become available. By 2025, we set out ambitious targets to have roughly 5,000 county-operated, EV charging stations at county facilities, and 15,000 by 2035. These are very ambitious goals that are in pretty good alignment with state objectives. Like I said, there's a number of investments and goals, behind this. The state has made very ambitious targets around zero emission vehicles, including potentially banning the sale of fossil fuel vehicles after a certain date. And so in order to meet that, there's a lot of funding that's becoming available already and will be available very soon. And just today, you might have seen the announcement. It's really the White House reiterating what was in the Infrastructure Act, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act that was passed just a few months ago, that $5 billion will become available nationally. In California alone, because of formula funding, California is slated to receive about $384 million directly for EV infrastructure over the next 5 years, and will also be competitive for about $2.5 billion of competitive grants that will be offered nationally. So that's the federal funding on top of the California budget request, which includes over $2 billion over the next several years for zero emission vehicle and zero emission vehicle infrastructure. So there's a lot of money that's coming from both the state, from the county, from the feds, that will be brought to bear to enhance the EV infrastructure network to enable this transition towards zero emission transportation. So in the county, my team supports the 30+ county departments. We have over it's a very large territory. 10 million people, 10 million residents across our region. We have that goal of installing more and more charging stations. We currently have about 730 or so charging stations installed. That's really a doubling from just a few years ago, and we're well on our way to get to the multiple thousands. We have many projects in the pipeline. It's almost every week that we commission new charging station projects across the county. But we have a lot of challenges. EV adoption is growing very rapidly, and one of the logistical problems that we have is that there aren't enough contractors with experience to help install and maintain chargers. When we go out for bid on projects that we need installed, we oftentimes only get 1 or 2 companies that bid on these projects. The projects can be delayed. Because these companies that are installing EV chargers are growing themselves extremely rapidly because of increased demand, both locally, regionally, and nationally. And so one of the things that we learned throughout this process over the past few years is that we also need to develop the workforce at the same time. And if I have a few minutes at the end, I'll try to speak on that as well. But one technical problem for all the geeks and nerds in the room, I'm a nerd myself, is that you soon have to realize that EV loads will soon become extremely significant. Okay, if you do the calculations, just in California, you look at how many gallons of gasoline and diesel fuel are sold across the state, and you translate that into electricity. For example, if 20, 30, 40 years, all the vehicles on the road are electric or other zero emissions, what you'll find is that the electric load on the California grid will increase 30 to 50%. Okay, that's a very significant increase in electric load, which will obviously require a lot of electric grid infrastructure investments. And so we're trying to minimize that as much as possible. I'm going to just show a dashboard. I just took a screenshot this morning. And on the bottom part of the screen is what I want to point you to. That's the charging profile across the entire county on any given day. What you see is there's a huge load, electric load, when everyone goes into work around 6 a.m. or so. People plug in their vehicles and they get their charge. It usually only takes a few hours to get to refuel or recharge your electric vehicle, and then people might move their vehicles at lunchtime, and then you'll see a lot of people recharging or charging their vehicles. People who didn't charge in the morning will be able to charge during lunchtime. Or after lunch. And so what I want to point out here is that EV charging will become the single largest electric load in most of our county facilities over the next 20 years. Right now, the single largest load for electricity for most commercial buildings is actually HVAC. But EV charging will soon dominate that, because we have some sites where we have 100 charging stations. Okay, at our hospitals, they're very well utilized. For example, where we have thousands of employees, those 100 charging stations can draw roughly 8 kilowatts a piece each at the same time, and so that's 800 kilowatts of power that those 100 charging stations can draw at the same time. That's nearly a megawatt, right? And yes, we have campuses that use multiple megawatts, but that will become the single largest load of electricity pretty soon. And the way we're addressing that is to utilize very an intelligent adaptive charging system. There's a number of companies that make these. We end up choosing PowerFlex through a master agreement. PowerFlex has been acquired by EDF, large multinational energy conglomerates, and this technology is available across the county, and that's what we're moving towards as we deploy more and more charging stations. We're using adaptive smart charging that allows us to balance the load throughout the day to not create undue burden on the local distribution as well as the broader grid. I do want to highlight a few processes that the county goes through in order to acquire the services to get charging stations installed. We have master agreements in place, but we also use job order contracting, and we were recently approved by the board for several $1 million job order contracting contracts. One of the things that I want to make sure that you and your communities, if you're around the country, think about as you deploy more and more EV infrastructure is to make sure that the people doing the work are skilled and knowledgeable, not just about EV charging installations, but also about the code. There's National Electric Code. There's other, sometimes state and local code requirements for EV infrastructure, as well as ADA requirements. And so those individuals need to be well versed in and skilled in the EV infrastructure. In the early days, that was not the case, and sometimes we find that we have to go back and fix problems that were installed years ago because the companies didn't do as good of a job as could be done. So you're better off working with skilled contractors from the get-go, to ensure good quality projects. We utilize the EVITP, electric vehicle infrastructure training program, as one of the criteria we have for our contractors, and the state uses that as well. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about renewable energy on county facilities and power purchase agreements and master agreements that we're putting in place in order to get more solar, more battery storage, on county facilities to help us decarbonize, electricity. The county itself is quite large. Okay, we have over 16 million square feet of real estates, buildings, that across the county. That's roughly the size of the federal GSA infrastructure in the DC, Baltimore area. All the federal buildings that we have out of DC and Baltimore. In that area is roughly 60 million square feet of real estate as well. We have that in LA County for county facilities. That's because we have large, consumer or public-facing facilities like hospitals, like prisons. They add up the square footage quite a bit, and so the county's annual utility bills is quite large. My department signs off on over $200 million a year in utility expenses, from electricity to natural gas to water, etc. I mean, that's a large expense. And so we're always looking for ways that we can control our costs as best we can. And using solar is one way to do that. And so just in the past couple of years, we installed about 4.5 megawatts of solar was completed across a number of different county facilities, anticipating to save quite a bit of money over the lifetime. And in California here, for those who are not in Southern California, we have a lot of sunshine, which is great. But it also means that employees and the visiting public who park outdoors, their cars get really hot in the sun. And so having carports and other shade structures is really beneficial. And that's a side benefit of generating our own electricity. Is really providing that shade and comfort to our employees and their vehicles. We also do some larger scale solar. We have a fairly large project up in Lancaster. This is the northern part of LA County. A couple megawatts of solar there. We're trying to expand it to about 10 megawatts. Will help offset some of our energy costs, at our facilities. But one thing I want to note here is that local government, I came from the federal government before I joined the local government. And, I can tell you that I was famous for, well, not famous, but I made a remark one time that with physics, one can calculate the upper limit for the performance of solar cells. Okay, with science, you can do that, fairly accurately. But there is no such upper limit to bureaucracy. Okay, and at the federal level, I saw some of that, but certainly at the local level, there's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of processes, and so it takes time, and it costs money. Time is money, and legal expenses to get these projects done. Okay, because this was a new way for LA County to sign agreements and contracts to get power. We usually buy power straight from the utilities, Southern California Edison or LADWP, for the most part. And buying power from a third-party vendor, who puts solar on your facilities, is a totally different game. And so when we signed our first contracts back in 2017, we made sure that we did it on larger projects because the economics, could work out on larger projects. And these big projects, you can spend the money on lawyers, and your counterparty can spend that money on lawyers to make sure that all the T's and C's are correct and meets all the codes and regulations. The challenge is, when you have smaller facilities, like smaller libraries, smaller, sheriff stations, we'd like to get solar on some of those as well. But the overhead burden for us to get that done is quite significant. And so we're developing, a new way to get these smaller projects, smaller and medium-sized projects done across the county by implementing a master agreement that can provide turnkey, systems for county buildings that will lower the annual electricity costs, as well as move the county closer towards, full 100% renewable energy. And then we're also incorporating some microgrid elements as a potential on some of the sites. So like I said, the master agreement process, which it allows our proposers to be pre-qualified before bidding. So it streamlines the bidding process for the county, and it speeds up the process in general. So we have categories that we work on, including rooftop, carport, ground mount, and energy storage. And the way we're trying to streamline this is that my team has already assessed over 50 county facilities, and what we're trying to do is bundle these facilities together geographically, because LA County is quite large. We're trying to make sure that we have, around 5 facilities that are in relatively close proximity to each other, so that contractors, bidders can bid on a group of facilities instead of a single one. And that would enable them and on us to lower our legal overhead burden and our soft costs, if you will, in getting these contracts done. So I'm going to skip ahead. An example is that we provide all the documentation. We have detailed photos, single line drawings, analysis that would allow our vendors to bid, as a package. They also have the opportunity to visit the site, of course, but then that will hopefully streamline our process to make it a lot easier for us to get solar on smaller and medium-sized facilities. Okay, I'm gonna run out of time soon, so I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about one more element, which I hinted at earlier, which is the workforce. Especially around like EV infrastructure, what we're finding is that the workforce isn't quite there yet. We are not seeing the number of companies, the number of skilled people in the field to bid on and implement, not just our plan, but the state's plans and federal plans around, the green economy, and in particular around clean transportation. And so the county, my team has recently pulled together what we call the Southern California Green Careers Accelerator to equip, connect, and employ people in these industries and help train them. It's a workforce development program to help train them and equip them to work in zero emissions transportation, clean energy, and smart sustainable cities. We actually pulled together this as a grant application to the Department of Commerce's Economic Development Administration. Our goal is to, and we're actually submitting this grant application today. Our goal is to place 1,600 people, into high quality jobs, high roads careers. And we're doing that by partnering with a number of organizations that already do this work, as well as the industries that they serve, to provide the training and skills for these workers. We're much larger, even though I work for LA County, from my national goal and my team's state experience. We're trying to make change, and we're trying to help a much larger territory than just LA County proper. My team runs programs that span multiple counties, in fact 12 counties, representing about 20 million residents in California. And what we're trying to do is create a synergy and a collaborative network that will allow stakeholders, both industry and our communities, to excel and build that workforce, do that training. We have a network of community colleges. We have a network of workforce training providers, a number of state agencies and local organizations to really push the workforce development and skills, in these areas, along with, and very importantly, we have support from organized labor, the AFL-CIO, as well as IBEW, in the work that we're trying to do here, under this grant application. So I'm going to end there and leave time for some questions, if I may.
Wow. That was very, again, inspirational and motivational. Let me just see if we've got any Q&A. I guess as part of your activities, you covered a lot of what the county does. We can also, and maybe you can send me some links to provide resources. So when people do want to understand regulations, you talked about the different approval processes, county, city, state, lots of different pieces. I'm assuming, can you share with me some of those resources for private sector organizations as well?
In terms of,
just the grants, training, appropriate links on the webpage to understand how they get approval to put in EV charging in their location, that would be great.
Certainly, we can share that, but I'll share with you, some experience.
Sure.
Even installing or working with some private sector companies and hearing their stories. So, I think it boils down to who is the AHJ, okay, authority having jurisdiction, and
I remember that from my days doing fire alarms, where the AHJ has to approve all the smoke detectors, and I guess it's the same way with high voltage wiring. Yeah,
and it's really a patchwork across the country, across the state. You got to figure out who the AHJ is, and oftentimes it's multiple jurisdictions, right? And so there was a story that was told to me a couple of years ago by a company that was trying to install some DC fast chargers next to a Starbucks, okay, at a shopping mall. And they were running into a roadblock with the local city, building inspector, building code, because, it was fairly new at the time. And, the local code inspector, was thinking about this as a vehicle refueling station. And they wanted to get permits. They wanted the company to get permits for underground storage tanks, underground gas storage tanks, because they were going to reclassify the Starbucks as a gas station. And there's a whole stream of work that needs to take place, obviously, for to build a gas station. And they wanted, this company to go through this process to do that, which, on the face of it seems insane, right? But I think part of it is education, right? Educating code officials, educating organizations about what are actually the requirements. There's National Electric Code, there's other things. So one of our partners, who's actually on this screen here, the Interstate Renewable Energy Council, has done a great job nationally in trying to coordinate a lot of those skills, a lot of information. Obviously there are other organizations that do that as well, but it is a patchwork because it depends on where the AHJ is. In some states, it's a lot easier than others. It's not that easy in California because we do have a lot of regulations, and it is challenging for sure.